Let me see, buddy. The dim light in the courtroom only heightened the tension in the air. All eyes were on the man standing in the center, his face weary, his hands trembling. He had only one final request before being sent away, to see his loyal companion, the one who had been with him through the darkest times. But no one expected that this reunion would mark the beginning of a secret that could change everything. Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. Now let me tell you the full story. This was the end of the line for him, but he only wanted one last thing before the inevitable. Let me see, buddy. He had begged the judge, and against all expectations, the request was granted. The wooden doors opened, and all eyes turned to the robust figure of a German shepherd being led by an officer. Buddy entered slowly, his ears alert, and his deep eyes sweeping the room until they found James. As soon as he saw him, the dog pulled hard on the leash, letting out a short howl that sliced through the silence like a sharp blade. James collapsed into tears, his previously controlled expression breaking into pure pain. "My God," someone in the audience murmured, unable to contain their emotion at witnessing the reunion. Buddy threw himself at James as soon as he was released, and the man on his knees embraced the dog as if his life depended on it. "I'm so sorry, my friend," he whispered, his voice trembling and barely audible. Tears flowed endlessly as his hands ran through Buddy's thick fur. It was as if he was trying to imprint that moment on his soul, knowing it would be the last. James's eyes, filled with pain, turned toward the judge, as if pleading for something more, a change, a miracle, anything. But then something unexpected happened. Buddy began tugging at James's suit pocket with his teeth, persistent and determined. James tried to gently push him away, confused, but the dog kept going until a crumpled piece of paper fell to the ground. The defense attorney, sitting just a few feet away, grabbed the paper, and when he opened it, his face paled. He stood up abruptly, staring at the judge. "Your Honor, we need to suspend the proceedings immediately. This could change everything." Los Angeles County Courthouse plunged into chaos. Whispers filled the room as the judge slammed his gavel, demanding order. James looked at the lawyer and then at the paper, his mind spinning. What did that piece of paper mean? He didn't remember putting anything there, and how did Buddy know it was there? For a moment, hope gleamed in his eyes, but it was quickly swallowed by fear, because in his experience, hope always came with pain. Los Angeles County Courthouse fell into tense silence, broken only by the rustling of the lawyer's clothes as he hurried to the judge, holding the piece of paper as if it were a sacred artifact. James's face was frozen in a mixture of confusion and anxiety as he watched the movements around him like a man on the edge of a cliff. He held Buddy tightly, the dog's warmth being his only anchor in that surreal moment. "What's happening?" he thought, but no one seemed willing to give him answers. The judge, with his stern and incredulous expression, took the paper from the lawyer's hands. Adjusting his glasses, he began reading silently, and as his eyes scanned the lines, his rigid posture changed. He furrowed his brow, his expression wavering between doubt and surprise. Is this serious?" he asked, looking up at the lawyer, who nodded affirmatively. The audience, restless, tried to decipher what was happening, while James felt his heart pounding so loudly it seemed to echo through the room. "Mr. Carter," the judge finally said, turning his attention to James, who instinctively held Buddy tighter. "Do you recognize this paper? These details?" James shook his head, confusion clear on his face. "I have no idea what this is, Your Honor," he replied, his voice hoarse and choked. But inside, something was starting to stir, an unknown fear mixed with a spark of hope. After all, how had this piece of paper ended up here? And why did Buddy seem to know of its existence? Before the judge could continue, the defense lawyer intervened urgently. "Your Honor, we need an immediate recess to verify this information. If the content of this document is authentic, it could prove my client was framed. It might be the evidence we've been missing to dismantle the entire case against him." The statement hit the courtroom like a bomb, causing murmurs and surprised looks. James's eyes widened, and he looked at the with a mixture of disbelief and desperation. Framed? What is he talking about? While the judge considered the request, James felt Buddy's paws on his lap, as if the dog were trying to calm him down. He looked at the animal and saw something in his eyes, not just loyalty, but a kind of almost human certainty, as if Buddy knew exactly what he was doing. For the first time, James allowed himself to think that maybe this moment, this encounter wasn't just a coincidence. You've always known, haven't you? Boy, he murmured, stroking the dog with a tenderness he could hardly contain. The judge finally gave his ruling, banging the gavel with force. The hearing will be adjourned until the information is verified. Mr. Carter, you will be transferred back to detention, but under special measures given the potential impact of this evidence. James's heart sank again. Hope had appeared, but as always, it seemed just out of reach. He looked at Buddy, who was reluctantly pulled away by an officer, and whispered, "Hang in there, my friend. Maybe it's not over yet." Back in the cold, empty cell, James felt the weight of silence fall on him like an invisible chain. Sitting on the small mattress, he stared at the floor, unable to process what had happened in court. The image of Buddy being taken against his will still burned in his mind. He had never seen the dog act that way, so determined, so human. It was almost as if Buddy had understood something James still couldn't grasp. But the more he thought about it, the more that uncomfortable feeling grew. What if that piece of paper could really change everything? Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, the defense lawyer worked frantically. The paper pulled from James's pocket contained details of a bank transaction and names that made no sense at first, but seemed to connect to a larger network. He immediately hired a document expert to verify the authenticity of the writing and the origin of the information. Every second felt like an unbearable burden as the answers did not come. The pressure was immense. This could be a false lead or, even worse, a carefully planted trap to throw sand in the case. In the cell, James replayed the events that had brought him there. He closed his eyes and was transported back to the past. The day the police knocked on his door, the shock of being accused of a crime he knew he hadn't committed, and the trial, where every witness seemed aligned to destroy him. He remembered how his lawyer had tried hard to find flaws in the case, but everything seemed too solid. Until that moment in court, James had accepted there was no way out. But now the appearance of that paper planted a doubt in his heart. Had someone planned this to incriminate him? Buddy? The name echoed in his mind like a persistent whisper. James knew the dog was not just a companion. He was his savior, his last connection to the life he had lost. But now, one question haunted him. Who had put that paper in his pocket? He couldn't remember anything like it, and that only deepened the mystery. Had Buddy found something while he was with him and hidden it somehow? The idea seemed absurd, but in that moment, James was willing to believe anything. The next morning, the lawyer returned with news. "James," he began, his words heavy with urgency, "this document, it's not just authentic. It proves that someone transferred money to an account in your name days before the crime. It was done to make it look like you had a motive." James's heart raced. He knew he was innocent, but hearing that felt like an electric shock. "That means someone set it all up," he said, his voice low but full of emotion. "Do you think this will be enough?" The lawyer hesitated, his hands tightening around the file. "We still don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, but James, we're closer to the truth than ever before, and somehow your dog seemed to know this before any of us." James took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the lawyer. "Then let's go all the way," he said, with a determination he thought he'd lost long ago. As the cell door closed again, he knew that the next move could change everything. The sun began to rise, but James had barely slept. The tension of knowing that his freedom depended on an unresolved mystery kept him awake. He mentally replayed every moment before his arrest, searching for any detail that could explain how that piece of paper had appeared. Every time he closed his eyes, it was always Buddy who appeared. The German Shepherd's eyes, deep and loyal, seemed to hold a secret he couldn't unravel. Something in Buddy's behavior, especially the insistence on protecting him during the trial, left James uneasy. Meanwhile, in the lawyer's office, the document was being carefully analyzed. There was one name in particular that stood out, a powerful businessman with political ties, someone who, at first glance, seemed to have no direct connection to James. The discovery was unsettling. Why would this man get involved in something like this? The lawyer decided to investigate further, but knew he was treading dangerous ground. The clues pointed to a conspiracy larger than they could imagine, something that involved much more than just the crime James had been convicted of. In prison, a guard brought a message for James. A visit was scheduled for the afternoon. The name was not provided, which was already strange. Anxiety increased as unexpected visits rarely meant good news. When he arrived at the visiting room, James found a woman sitting on the other side of the glass. She was well-dressed, with a cold, calculating demeanor, but there was something in her eyes that betrayed her tension. "You don't know me," she began, "but I know who you are. And more importantly, I know who put you here." James remained silent, watching every move the woman made. She seemed hesitant, but continued. "The man whose name is on that document, he has more secrets than you can imagine, and you were just a pawn in his game. What he did to you was personal." James leaned forward, his fist clenched. "Personal? I don't even know him. Why would he do this to me?" The woman looked away as if carefully considering what she was about to say, because he needed someone to blame, and you were the perfect target. "You're not as unknown as you think." Her words opened a wound James didn't even know existed. He tried to understand what she meant, but the woman didn't offer any details. Before leaving, she left a note with the lawyer. "He'll know what to do with this," she said, without looking back. The visit, though brief, threw James into a spiral of doubts and fear. Who was this woman? How did she know so much? And above all, what did it mean that he wasn't as unknown as he thought? The questions echoed like a storm in his mind. Back in the cell, James held his head in his hands. He felt as if he was on the verge of discovering something that would change everything, but he still couldn't piece the puzzle together. Deep down, he knew time was against him, but there was one unshakable certainty. The key to everything was still Buddy. Something about that dog, something he had tried to show, was the missing piece. And James knew that, if he wanted to make it out alive, he needed to figure out what it was before it was too late. James spent hours lying in the narrow bed, the woman's words echoing in his mind. "You're not as unknown as you think." Something inside him told him this was tied to Buddy. He remembered the day he first saw the dog at the shelter, hurt, with deep scars, but with a determined look that captivated him instantly. Buddy's past, up until then a mystery, seemed to be slowly revealing itself, and anxiety grew within him. The next day, the lawyer brought an envelope with an address and a phrase. "Ask about the fire." James froze when he recognized the address. It was the shelter where he had adopted Buddy. The memory of that place resurfaced, bringing a mix of sadness and curiosity. Something in the shelter's past and in Buddy's past seemed directly linked to his situation. James's instincts told him he needed the answers the lawyer was going to find. Meanwhile, the tension in the prison was rising. James began noticing strange behaviors. A group of inmates watched him in the yard, speaking in low voices and exchanging furtive glances. Even more disturbing was the behavior of one of the guards, who seemed to be constantly in contact with these men. Distrust gnawed at James, and he began questioning whether he was truly safe there. At night, footsteps echoed down the hallway and stopped in front of his cell, only to disappear moments later. The feeling of being watched made every minute a torment. When the lawyer returned, his worried expression didn't bring any relief. He revealed that the shelter had been destroyed in a mysterious fire years ago, the same one that left marks on Buddy's body. Even worse, old records showed that Buddy had been rescued from a property owned by the man behind James's imprisonment. Each discovery seemed like a piece of a puzzle James never knew he was putting together, but the picture starting to form was terrifying. Buddy, the dog who had been his only source of hope, now seemed to be the key to unraveling a dark secret. James felt the weight of responsibility. He needed to find Buddy, not only because the animal meant everything to him, but because something in Buddy's scars and his past held the answer that could change everything. Lying in the cold cell, James knew time was running out. The connections that once seemed improbable now felt inevitable. Whatever Buddy had witnessed in the past, he was determined to uncover. Even if it meant facing something much bigger than he ever imagined, the lawyer returned the next day with a look of heavy tension on his face. He brought a series of old documents, burned photographs, and, more alarmingly, a police report of the fire at the shelter. "James, this goes far beyond what we expected," he said, sliding the papers across the table in the living room. Among the records was a photo of Buddy as he was before being rescued, thin, injured, and chained on a rural property. The property, to James's horror, belonged to Michael Everett, the same man who had built the case against him. James felt a knot form in his stomach. He read every line with wide eyes, the words blurring as a disturbing truth began to surface. Everett was known for his involvement in shady business, including an underground dog-fighting ring. Buddy wasn't just a survivor of the fire, he was a living witness to the atrocities committed at that place. And now it seemed that Everett was willing to do anything to keep these buried. As he absorbed the information, James began to connect the dots. The fire that destroyed the shelter wasn't accidental. It was a desperate attempt to erase evidence, including the dogs who could bring down Everett. Somehow Buddy had escaped, but he carried the marks of that terrible past on his body and in his behavior. Now James understood why he had been the target of a setup. He was the one who had unknowingly protected the only witness who could expose everything. That same night, back in his cell, James felt the weight of the conspiracy around him. The footsteps in the dark now seemed deliberate, and the glances exchanged between the prisoners and guards made it clear that something was about to happen. He didn't know who to trust, but he was certain that time was running out. He needed to get out of there. But before that, he had to make sure Buddy was safe. If something happens to me, he needs to be protected, he thought, with a determination burning in his chest. The next day, James asked his lawyer to contact an animal protection group. He knew Buddy might be in danger, especially now that Everett could realize the dog's secrets were about to come to light. The lawyer hesitated but agreed, seeing the seriousness in James's eyes. "I'll do it, but you need to hold on, James." "Don't let them silence you," the man said before hurriedly leaving. Now, alone in his cell, James began to plan his next move. He knew he couldn't wait for justice passively. Buddy's fate and the truth about Everett were intertwined, and he needed to find a way to expose everything. What he didn't know was that, at that very moment, forces were moving to ensure he would never get that chance. The darkness of the night brought an unsettling silence. James, lying in his cold cell, felt that something was different. It wasn't just the growing tension from recent discoveries, but the feeling that he was being watched. He closed his eyes, trying to ignore the discomfort, but the sound of soft footsteps echoing down the corridor made him sit up immediately. Something was happening, and he knew he needed to stay alert. The footsteps stopped right in front of his cell. James held his breath, trying to listen more carefully. Suddenly, a low, firm voice broke the silence. "Carter, we need to talk." It was the guard he recognized from his daily rounds, but there was something different in his tone. The man seemed cautious, as if he were risking a lot by speaking. James moved closer to the door, intrigued. "What do you want with me?" he asked, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. The guard looked around before answering. "There are things happening here that you don't fully understand. Powerful people are involved, and you're closer to the truth than you should be." James felt a chill run down his spine. "If you know something, why are you here? Why tell me this now?" The guard hesitated before responding, his expression full of tension. "Because I believe you're innocent, and also because they're moving fast. I don't know how long I can protect you." Before James could ask more questions, the guard slid an envelope under the door. "This was left for you. Use it carefully. I won't be here to help you next time." Without saying anything else, he quickly stepped away, disappearing down the hallway before James could thank or question him. With trembling hands, James took the envelope. Inside, there was an old photograph and a handwritten note. "The answers are closer than you think. Trust what you know." He held the photo under the dim light of the cell. It was an image of Buddy, much younger, chained in a place that looked like a rural property. In the background, there was a barn with a familiar symbol painted on the wood. James tried to remember where he had seen that symbol, but his mind seemed like a blur. All he knew was that the photo was another piece of a puzzle that was becoming increasingly complicated. In the following days, the feeling of being watched grew. James noticed the lingering glances from some prisoners and even other guards. He didn't know who was on his side and who might be working against him. Despite this, the photo in the envelope gave him a new sense of determination. He needed to figure out where that barn was and what the connection between Buddy and the man behind his imprisonment was. When the lawyer returned, James shared the photo and the note. "Does this mean anything to you?" he asked, trying to control his anxiety. The lawyer studied the image for a moment before shaking his head. "Not immediately, but I'll look into it. This symbol, it could be an important clue. I'll start there." As the lawyer left, James felt a mix of hope and apprehension. He knew time was against him, but for the first time, it seemed like the truth was within his reach. The following morning brought a heavier air than usual in the prison. James could feel the tension building as if something big was about to happen. As he walked to the cafeteria, under the constant watch of the guards, he noticed more intense looks and murmurs among the other inmates. It wasn't paranoia. There was an atmosphere of expectation in the air, and he was right at the center of it. He knew he had to stay calm, but his instincts told him danger was approaching fast. In the visitation room, the lawyer arrived with a look of deep concern. He placed some papers on the table, adjusted his glasses, and looked directly at James. "I found the barn in the picture," he began, his voice steady. "It's on a property that's been abandoned for years, but it belongs to a man we know well, Michael Everett." James felt his blood run cold. Everett again. "Of course. What else did you find?" The lawyer sighed before continuing. "The barn was used as a meeting point for illegal activities, and it seems that Buddy was rescued from there during an operation that almost uncovered the entire truth about Everett's scheme." James closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the words. The weight of what was happening started to hit him harder. "So now what? How does this help my case?" he asked, trying to stay calm. Attorney looked at him seriously. "We need to link Buddy directly to the case. If we can prove he was there and that Everett is tied to him, this could be the turning point. But James, this also means we're dealing with something very dangerous. There are people who don't want this truth to come out." Back in the cell, James felt torn between hope and fear. He knew he was approaching something big, but he also felt that every step put him at risk. As he reflected, he remembered moments with Buddy, the unshakable bond they had built. There was something in the dog's behavior that always seemed more than instinctive. It was almost as if he knew his presence meant more than just companionship. James was determined to protect him no matter the cost. As night fell, the feeling of unease grew stronger. James heard footsteps in the corridor again, but this time no one stopped in front of his cell. He looked through the small window in the door and saw a guard exchanging suspicious glances with a prisoner. Something was being planned, and James knew he needed to be ready. He sat on the bed, his thoughts spinning. The key to everything was still Buddy, and he needed to uncover the truth before it was too late. As the lawyer continued his investigation, James felt the noose tightening. Every discovery brought a new layer of complexity to the case, but it also brought the truth closer. He didn't know how it would all end, but one thing was certain. He would fight to the end to protect Buddy and expose what really happened. Fate seemed to be playing its last cards, and James was about to play his own. The early morning brought with it an unsettling silence, broken only by the distant sound of metal doors closing. James, lying in his bed, knew something was moving behind the scenes. He had learned to recognize the signs: the guards' diverted glances, the murmurs among the prisoners, and the way the lawyer seemed more and more pressured. It was as if everything was converging toward an inevitable moment. Time was running out, and he needed to act before it was too late. That morning, the lawyer returned with new information that deepened the mystery. "James, we found records of other properties owned by Everett. One of them is directly linked to the fire at the shelter where Buddy was found. The strangest part is that these properties were transferred to third parties shortly before his arrest. This is no coincidence." James felt his anger grow within him. "So, not only did he set me up, but he's also trying to erase any trace that connects him to these places?" The lawyer nodded. "Exactly. But now we have a problem. We need solid proof, and from what I've discovered, there's someone who might have the answers. Someone who worked for Everett back then." James listened intently as the lawyer revealed more details. The person in question was a former trusted employee of Everett, who had disappeared after the fire. Now he lived in a small remote town, avoiding contact with anyone who could connect him to the past. If we can talk to him, maybe we can get information that confirms what we know about Everett's involvement. But it will be risky. He may not be willing to cooperate, the lawyer explained. James nodded, feeling the weight of uncertainty. We have no choice. If he knows anything, we need to find out. Meanwhile, in the prison, the tension was mounting. James noticed that suspicious footsteps and glances were becoming more frequent. He knew the circle around him was tightening. There was something in the air, a feeling that a final attempt to silence him was about to happen. But at the same time, he felt an unwavering determination. They might try to stop me, he thought, but I won't give up. Not now. As the day went on, James mentally prepared himself for what was to come. He knew the next few hours would be crucial. The truth was within reach, but it was also surrounded by dangers. He thought of Buddy, how that dog seemed to carry all the answers with him, even without saying a word. You're the key to everything, boy, he murmured to himself. And I'll do whatever it takes to protect you and reveal the truth. Los Angeles County Courthouse was packed that morning, with a tense silence hanging in the air. James, sitting beside his lawyer, could feel his heart racing as he awaited the start of the crucial hearing. The new evidence was all laid out on the table. The photo of Buddy in the barn, the testimony from Everett's former employee, and the documents linking the businessman to the arson and a network of illegal activities. In the corner of the room, James spotted Buddy, brought in by an animal protection organization. The German Shepherd looked at him with the same loyalty as always. And in that moment, James felt a wave of renewed strength. The lawyer began his argument, presenting the testimony that would change everything. The former employee revealed how Everett had orchestrated the fire to cover up evidence and how James had been falsely incriminated. He explained that Buddy was one of the few survivors of that place and that his escape had put the dog and anyone who protected him at the center of a dangerous conspiracy. James Carter was not only the victim of a setup, but he also risked his life unknowingly to protect the only living witness to this scheme, said the lawyer. The revelation left the courtroom in shock. As the judge reviewed the evidence, his expression shifted to one of indignation and seriousness. He declared that the charges against James were unfounded and ordered a full investigation into Everett's activities. Hearing the judge's words, James felt a wave of relief and emotion he hadn't experienced in years. He looked at Buddy, who was wagging his tail as if he understood the battle was won. For the first time, James felt that his life and that of his loyal companion was being restored. After the hearing, as he left the courthouse with Buddy by his side, James took a deep breath, feeling the sun on his face again like a free man. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he also knew that nothing could break the bond he had with Buddy. "We made it, boy," he said, petting the dog. The truth had finally prevailed, and with it came the promise of a new beginning for both of them. The story you've just witnessed is more than just a final reunion between a man and his dog. It's a journey of rediscovery, sacrifice, and unconditional friendship. Buddy the dog, though just an animal, was the loyal companion who pulled his human friend from the darkness of doubt and pain into the light of freedom. Life doesn't always unfold the way we expect. Sometimes secrets lie in places we can't even imagine, and with just one defining moment, everything can change. This is a deeply emotional story about love, loyalty, and the power of truth. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss out on more surprising and heartfelt videos. Thank you for watching, and always remember to have faith in change, even when it seems unseen. We'll see you again in the next story filled with emotion and wonder.